Imagine a dark and stormy night. The wind howls, the rain beats on the windows, and in the distance you can hear thunder. Inside you, a restlessness grows, a feeling of unease that you can't explain. Secret hatred is like this, a storm that breaks out in someone else's soul, and whose shock waves reach us, destabilizing us, making us feel insecure and vulnerable. But what if we had a beacon in the night, a light that could illuminate hidden dangers? What if we could learn to read the signals, to decipher the cryptic messages that the unconscious sends us? This is the journey we are about to embark on, guided by the wisdom of a man who has long sailed the stormy seas of the human psyche. But before we continue, if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you know when we post videos like this. Professor Alastair Humphrey, a man whose face was lined with wrinkles that looked like maps of ancient travels, leaned heavily on his desk. The university psychology classroom, usually a hive of voices and ideas, was wrapped in an unnatural silence. It wasn't just the tiredness of the last day of classes before summer vacation. It was something deeper, a palpable tension, as if an invisible rope were stretched between the students. Professor Humphrey, his voice hoarse but penetrating, broke the silence. Today, he announced, we will explore a dark and insidious territory, hate, but not the hate that manifests itself openly with shouts and insults. We will talk about the secret hate, the one that lurks deep inside, like a poison that slowly corrodes relationships. The professor's words resonated in the classroom like an echo of unspoken fears. Many students suddenly felt uncomfortable, as if a spotlight had been turned on them, revealing their hidden insecurities. To understand the nature of this subtle hatred, the professor continued, we must rely on the wisdom of Carl Gustav Jung, a pioneer who illuminated the depths of the unconscious. Jung revealed to us the existence of the shadow, that part of ourselves that we reject, that we'd hide even from ourselves, our fears, our unspeakable desires, our insecurities. Professor Humphrey stood up and began to walk slowly between the desks, like an old sea dog watching the horizon. When someone harbors secret hatred toward us, he explained, they are actually projecting their own shadow onto us. They see in us what they cannot accept about themselves, what torments them, what makes them feel inadequate. His voice was calm, but his words were heavy with meaning. It was as if he were offering students a key to a long-closed door, a door that led to a deeper understanding of themselves and others. A student named Sarah raised her hand, her face pale and worried. Professor, she asked, her voice faint, but how can we recognize this projection? How can we tell if someone secretly hates us? Professor Humphrey paused, looking at her with an enigmatic expression. The signs, my dear Sarah, are often like whispers in the shadows, almost inaudible. But once we learn to listen, they become as clear as a cry in the silence. And so, the professor began to reveal the signs, one by one, like a skilled weaver unraveling an intricate plot. The first sign, he said, is excessive compliments. Beware of exaggerated flattery, those compliments that ring false, that do not correspond to reality. Often, they are a way to mask envy and resentment, like a mask that hides a hostile face. Another sign, and this one can be particularly painful, she continued, is constant criticism, even if it's presented as constructive advice. Constant and unsolicited criticism is a subtle weapon, a way to belittle you, to undermine your self-esteem, to make you feel inadequate. The professor paused, observing the students' reactions. Some nodded, others stared blankly, as if they were reliving painful experiences. Sometimes, he continued, secret hatred manifests itself through subtle sabotage. Little acts of carelessness, such as forgetting to pass on important information, spreading negative rumors about you, or even damaging your projects. They are like little pinpricks, which individually may seem insignificant, but which together create a climate of hostility. And then there's avoidance, she continued. If a person consistently avoids you, if they abruptly end conversations when you approach them, or if they constantly find excuses not to spend time with you, it could be a sign of discomfort and aversion. It's as if your presence is a source of discomfort, a reminder of something they don't want to deal with. Professor Humphrey approached a group of students, speaking softly, almost confidentially. Body language, he said, is an open book to those who know how to read it. Furtive glances, forced smiles, crossed arms, hunched shoulders, the body often betrays what the words try to hide. It is as if the unconscious were shouting out what the conscious mind is trying to repress. Another insidious sign is when they make fun of you through sarcastic imitation, the professor added. When your words, your gestures, your expressions are repeated in a derisive way, it is a clear attempt to belittle you, to ridicule you, to make you feel uncomfortable. Professor Humphrey noticed that some students were starting to feel overwhelmed. Don't be afraid, he said, his tone reassuring. Knowledge is power. The more we understand these mechanisms, the less vulnerable we will be. She spoke again about signals with renewed energy. Social exclusion, she explained, is another form of passive aggression. Being excluded from important conversations, events, or decisions is a way of making you feel marginalized, of telling you that you are unwanted, that you do not belong. It is as if they are telling you, without words, that you are not worthy of their attention. A particularly subtle signal, he continued, is the minimization of your successes. When you achieve a goal, when you get recognition, the person who secretly hates you will try to diminish your achievement, attributing it to luck, chance, or the help of someone else. It is a way of denying your value, of not recognizing your effort and your talent. Professor Humphrey approached a student who seemed particularly upset. Malicious gossip, he told her, is a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it serves to spread negative rumors about you to damage your reputation. On the other hand, it is a way for the person who hates you to vent their anger and resentment without having to confront you directly. Finally, the professor concluded his analysis with one last signal, perhaps the most difficult to manage. Passive aggression, he explained, is a maze of ambiguous behaviors, sarcastic comments, hostile silences, disapproving looks, broken promises. It is an indirect way of expressing anger and resentment, a way of making you feel uncomfortable and guilty, without ever giving you the opportunity to react openly. Professor Humphrey paused, letting his words resonate through the room. He had painted a grim picture, but he didn't want to leave his students in despair. Now that you know the signs, he said, his voice exuding strength and hope, what can you do? How can you protect yourselves from this emotional storm? A student named Maria raised her hand, her expression determined. Professor, she said, can we try to talk to these people, understand why they are acting this way? Professor Humphrey nodded, but cautiously. In some cases, an open and honest discussion can be helpful, he admitted. But remember that those casting their shadows are often unaware of what they are doing. The discussion may trigger a defensive reaction, making the situation worse. So what can we do? Asked another student named Marco, his voice betraying his frustration. The answer, my dear students, said Professor Humphrey, is more complex, but also more powerful. We must work on ourselves. We must build an inner fortress, a safe place where the hatred of others cannot penetrate. Jung left us another precious legacy, continued the professor, the concept of individuation. Becoming fully ourselves also means facing our shadow, accepting our dark parts, transforming our weaknesses into strengths. Professor Humphrey walked over to the window, watching the sun begin to set, painting the sky with warm, intense colors. When we learn to know ourselves deeply, he said, when we accept our lights and our shadows, we become less vulnerable to external attacks. Other people's hatred does not disappear, but it loses its power over us. It no longer hurts us because it no longer resonates with our insecurities. The university bells rang, announcing the end of the last class. The students slowly stood up, gathering their books and bags, but their faces were different than before. They were no longer lost and afraid. They had received a precious gift: awareness. Professor Humphrey watched them leave the classroom, one by one. He knew that life's journey would bring them many more challenges, many more emotional storms, but he also knew that, thanks to this lesson, they would have the tools to navigate safely, to protect their inner light, to find their way to serenity. And as the classroom emptied, Professor Humphrey whispered to himself with a serene smile, "Remember, young travelers, the words of Jung. He who looks out dreams. He who looks in awakens. And awakening, sometimes, can be the greatest adventure." Awareness, like a beacon in the night, would light their path, protecting them from the pitfalls of secret hatred and guiding them towards self-discovery.